Thank you, Nolan. Appreciate the invitation, and it's really good to be back with you, as well as the rest of the participants here today. I'm familiar both with the work Nolan has done, obviously, but also the orientation of this group. And I want to say I applaud all of you for attending this and using it as yet another avenue to understand the function of leadership, to pick up some leadership helpful hints and skills, and basically think about how you can be a better leader in the world. I fancy myself being both a student and a practitioner of leadership basically all my life, and that continues until today. I've learned a lot over the years. I hope I'll share some of that with you here today. But if you're like me, you aren't a born leader. You probably didn't get what I would call a formal education in leadership, unless some of you maybe are in the military. That might have been as close as you got. I certainly did not in either high school, college, or any of the academic pursuits I've had, because typically people don't teach leadership. One of the reasons I helped establish this Leadership and Service Center at the University of Tennessee is to try to give that orientation because of my passion for leadership and the feeling of how important it is. So anything you do like this, I think is good. And my view is you learn leadership through on-the-job training by doing it. You learn it through observation of leaders that you've served with and under, and what has worked, and probably more important, what didn't work that you don't want to replicate. And then I do believe that you can attend training sessions and do some self-help, whether it's read a book about leadership that will help you develop academically in some of the fundamentals of leadership. That certainly has been instrumental to me attending Rockwell Leadership Forums, as well as a few books I've picked up along the way that have sort of formed and shaped my thoughts and ideas. So this is another brick in the wall I look at, and I applaud you for doing it. Now, when Nolan asked me what I was going to talk about today, I always have to think about that because I have a different variant each time. But I thought maybe sharing with you lessons learned that I've accumulated over 40 plus years could be helpful, and you can take them for whatever they're worth to you and use them or throw them away as you see fit. But before I get into those, I think we need context, and especially because this is only my experience, and every one of us has a different one. And the context is really my career path and my journey that obviously is pretty much over now that I'm retired. But I think it's instructive in terms of what shaped my lessons learned. I can tell you that as I share my leadership journey and my career path, I hope no one ever tries to replicate what I did, because it is the probably hardest, worst way to advance your career compared to what I would believe a more logical, more frankly, fruitful way of doing it is. I had virtually no stage in my early career did I plan anything. And if I did have a plan, it almost universally didn't work out. The second thing I would say about it is most of what guided my career was pure serendipity. Showing up, right place, right time, getting lucky, turning left instead of turning right, seeing an opportunity and willing to take a stupid risk to take it. Very little of that was thought out very much. It's just these small decisions we make in our life that, boy, fundamentally affect where you go for years and years after that. And then the other thing I would say is probably since I got out of the Air Force, in my entire industrial career, I felt I was underqualified and underprepared for every single job I ever had, except for the last one. When I became CEO of Rockwell Collins, I felt I was really ready to do that. Now, was I really ready? Maybe 60 or 70%, because in that job, there are a lot of it you don't know until you get in it and learn it. But at least on that one, I felt I was prepared. All the other ones previous to that, I was put in a position where my first instinct of, you got to be kidding me. I'm not prepared for this job. I'm not qualified for this job. And yet it worked out. Now, to jump to the punchline, I think the reason it worked out is not because of my great education background, not because of my domain skills that I had learned previous to that in certain ideas like accounting or finance or engineering or program management. I think it was singly and exclusively related to my leadership competencies that allowed me to overcome that underpreparedness to go on and hopefully do an adequate job. And so those are sort of the summary frameworks around what guided my career. Give you some examples. So right out of college, I went to the University of Tennessee like Nolan did. Right out of college, I was in ROTC, graduated in 1971. Vietnam War was going hot and heavy, so I go into the Air Force. Spent 8 great years in the Air Force flying fighters. My last assignment was in the F-15, which was brand new at the time. Hard to believe it's that old now, but brand new fighter, the best one in the world. And when I got that assignment in 1976, I'm a lifer. I'm going to stay in the Air Force forever. And then life began to take its way with you. It's at this point, the latter part of the Carter administration. People don't think very much of the military because of the Vietnam experience. Our pay raises were half of inflation. We weren't funding the military, so our airplanes were broken all the time for lack of maintenance and spare parts. And then more importantly, because of all this, a lot of people that I admired and respect were getting out of the Air Force, and they're going off to fly with the airlines. Because, I mean, who wouldn't want to go fly with the airlines? They pay a lot of money, you don't work very hard, and it's like the perfect job. And you know how to fly. So I made the difficult decision in 1979, after 8 years, that, you know, my fame and fortune lies somewhere else. I'm going to go get out of the Air Force. And I 100% pursued an airline career. All my applications, all the interviews I had were heading that direction. Basically, all you had to do is to be able to breathe and write your name down, and you get hired as a pilot. Except for the fact that in the fall of 1979, there was a huge Arab oil embargo. The price of fuel went sky high. The price of tickets in the airlines went high with it. And as a result of that, people quit flying. They didn't need as many pilots. So all the interviews I had, the companies called me and said, don't call us, we'll call you. We don't need any pilots right now. Devastated. What am I going to do? I had no plan B. Didn't know where I was going to go. And truly would probably be driving taxi cabs right now if I hadn't run into a former colleague of mine who said a guy that he knows at Rockwell International was working a weapons program, and they were looking for a guy getting out of the military, not a retiree, a younger guy getting out of the military to go in what they call business development. Business development is a term they use there for a combination of marketing and sales. Kind of combines the two. So I said, listen, I've got no other opportunities, so I'll put an application in. They flew me out to California. I had an interview. The guy I interviewed with was a former test pilot at Rockwell. And so we had a grand time, talked with our hands. You're good looking, I'm good looking. Everybody's having a fun time. And they hire me. No sales experience, no marketing experience. And even the part of the Air Force that I had to represent is not the part of the Air Force I was in. They were working with the systems command that designed and built systems. I was working in an operational command that flew the systems. And so I kind of knew they were there, but I didn't know anybody. I didn't know how it worked, nothing. But they hired me anyway. Get out there. And I would say for that job, which I wasn't prepared for, I struggled with, but you just sort of figure it out. I developed a mentoring relationship with a chief engineer out there, which was enormously helpful for helping me understand what they do. And then I looked around for opportunities as they came up, none initially, but then I ran into somebody who was looking for a similar position over at the Rockwell aircraft business, which was across Los Angeles. And I was fortunate enough to get him interested enough in me that they hired me to go over there. And this was at a time when we were between the cancellation of the B-1A and the Reagan resurrection of the B-1B bomber as part of his filling the strategic gap that it was there. Fortunate, I arrived there just before the B-1B contract was brought back. And at least I knew what I was doing over there because it was aircraft. Next big point. I was sitting with my boss and we were doing a career projection thing. Well, where do you think you ought to go next? I go, I don't know. He says, well, you're in business development, you need field experience. So let's look for an opportunity for you to get out closer to the customer and get a field experience. So along came a program called the President's Commission on Executive Exchange, which was a loaned executive experience that the government had started under the Nixon administration, actually, to share executives. And by doing that, you get to use expertise and know how the government or industry works across borders. So we did that for, so I was selected to do that, to go to Washington, D.C., to work in the government for a year. And the deal was I would stay in the Washington office to help if they brought back the B-1 bomber, and Rockwell was the prime contractor. So that's the way it worked out. Worked in government for a year, stayed in the Washington office. The B-1 program was resurrected. And so I was able to stay in the Washington office from about 1973 to about 1995. And in so doing, really played more to my strengths. Again, a marketing business development background. My undergraduate degree was political science, so I thought I was using a little bit of that too. I'm kind of a political junkie, so I like that. And I worked my way up in Rockwell to be the head of the Washington office and the head of the international staff function, reporting directly to the CEO. So at that point, say 16 years into my career, I assumed my career progression was capped out because there's really nowhere else to go from there. And as I said, I wasn't qualified to move into any of the operational businesses of Rockwell. So I was pretty good at this. This is a fairly high position. I would just ride my career out doing that. That lasted 9 months. 9 months after I was selected for that role, I got a call one night saying that the chairman CEO was doing some restructuring of the company, and that one of them involved me. And what he wanted me to do is to move from this position, reporting directly to the CEO, to a general management position in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, which I'd been to one day in my whole life, to run a commercial air transport business that basically produced avionics for Boeing and Airbus and the airlines. Because they had lost a general manager a year ago, they'd lost a couple of Boeing contracts, they were sort of down on their luck, and they actually were having trouble finding someone to go in that position. Would you take that job? Now, interestingly enough, this was hugely risky to me, but I was of a mindset, I don't know, it was my military background and my Southern heritage, that it's not like they gave me a choice. If the chairman CEO asks you to go in this job, you don't think about it a long time. You say, okay, if you want me to do it, I go. And that's what I did. So I went back there, and that was my move from a staff role to a general management role. Again, monumentally underqualified and underprepared. In general, those positions are filled by engineers, program management, or finance people, none of which I had practical experience doing. Now, I had gotten my MBA, so I had a little education there, but none of those credentials that you would normally have to go into a role like that. Moreover, in the history of this unit in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, which was founded in 1933, I was the first general manager ever to come from outside that immediate business area that had been groomed from within. So you can imagine there was a little suspicion about this corporate guy coming in, taking this role. But you go do what you have to do. And the advantage I had is I came in with fresh eyes to understand why they had trouble in the past. And guess what the problem was? The problem is because they weren't listening to their customers. They got a little technically arrogant, and they weren't designing products that the customer wanted and when the customer wanted. I got that right away. You rally the troops around you. You say, here's the new plan. Here's where we're going to go. And actually, we turned that business around in about 2 years, at which time they then consolidated a lot of businesses in this avionics and communications organization, because Rockwell was going through some strategic divestitures. And I was made executive vice president. At that point in time, we got to redesign the business. 2 years later, I was made president of the operation. And then I did that for 2 years until Rockwell ultimately decided to spin us off in 2001 to a public company. That's when the fun really began, because when we spun out as a public company, we had no way of knowing what we were getting into. It was July of 2001, which was exactly 10 weeks before 9/11. And what we found is that 60% of our business was tied up in commercial aviation. And when they freeze airspace worldwide, that's not good for your business. So we lost 27% of our revenue in the next 2 years, had to lay off 17% of our workforce just to stop the bleeding. But in the process of doing that, I think formed the team and the direction that we need to make that company successful, which by the time I retired, it had doubled its sales and tripled its profitability. So we came through that and a lot of other changes okay. So that's sort of my career progression, for whatever that's worth. And so you step back from that sort of interesting career path, I think, and you say, what did I take from that relative to leadership? Well, the first thing I took from it is to understand how to define it, and define it in a way that I think was meaningful to me. Now, there are multiple definitions of leadership. You can pick any academic book, go through them, and they're all good definitions, and they're all valid for the thesis that the writer is presenting. I will offer you three that I have found instrumental in my experience because they related to me most. The first is the one that Jim Collins talked about in his first great book, Good to Great. Highly recommend it if you haven't read it. It's just a treatise on the right way to establish and run a business. And what Collins did, and it was the very first chapter of the book, he talked about leadership in 5 levels. And he says most companies go fairly handily through the 4th level, 1, 2, 3, 4. But where it separates the good from the great companies is the ability to generate and produce levels that are level 5 leaders. And essentially what the level 5 that he's talking about is someone who puts service above themselves. Today, we would call that a servant leader, that is not so caught up in their own advancement, either career-wise or monetarily, but that their decisions and their ability to guide the company is more focused on what's good for the company, the employees, the share owners, than what's good for them. And they're willing to take that self-sacrifice if that's what's necessary to make what they think the right decision is. And I think that is true even more today when we think about the what's going on in the modern business with the change in shareholder capitalism and the ESG movement that is wildly changing and affecting public companies. It is really about servant leadership. What are you doing not only for the share owners, but what are you doing for the community and the world, and what kind of good citizen are you? So I think it was well before its time when Collins talked about it, and was influential to me. The second one I learned was a guy named John Kotter. Kotter is a professor at Harvard, and he teaches leadership, and he's written a lot of books on leadership. And he described, I'll call it, the functions of a leader as good as anybody I've ever heard. And basically, it's 3 elements. First is you establish direction. When you really think about a leader in a company, very seldom are the people themselves going to think strategically and establish a direction. It is the role of leadership to at least catalyze that. And you can involve people in doing it, but someone has to set the direction, and that's the role of a leader. Second is then you align the people around that direction. That sounds pretty easy. It's really, really hard. Why should we go in that direction? How are we going to go in that direction? Will I be safe and comfortable in that direction? You know, there's risk there. How do I overcome that risk? So that alignment process is tough. And then once you have them marching in that direction, you motivate and inspire. Your job is done. You just try to make them feel good that they're doing good work, keep doing it. Yeah, you fell down, we'll get back up on the horse, let's go. And so that's fairly a simplistic look. You establish direction, align the people, inspire and motivate. I resonate a lot with that. It really is what leaders do. But my favorite definition of leadership, because I think it captures what the essence of leadership really is, was actually penned by a guy back in the late 80s by the name of Joel Barker. Joel Barker was one of the first people to talk about paradigm shifts in different things that happen in the world. Obviously, still a popular theory, but he talked about as almost an adjunct of that thesis on paradigms. He talked about leaders and their role, and he described a leader like this. He said, a leader is someone you will follow to a place that you wouldn't go by yourself. I'll repeat that. A leader is someone you will follow to a place that you wouldn't go by yourself. And that kind of sums up what a leader does. A leader is a person in motion. Leadership is an activity in motion. Leaders, by definition, are going from some place to another place. We're here, our goal is there. How are we going to get there? You're not a manager. A manager manages process. It replicates something for maximum efficiency. But a leader is trying to move people in a certain direction that likely they would not have gone without you suggesting it and being willing and their ability to follow you there. So why is that definition so critical? And it's critical because I believe the essence of leadership is to manage what I call the paradox of change. So here's my thesis. If you think of any entity, organization, company, religion, group of people, define the organizational structure as you will, nations, cities, whatever it is. If you see any entity in the history of the world, let's make this big, I would contend to you that there's no example, zero example of any of those organizations or entity that have been successful in the long term without changing, without adapting to change. Now, if somebody's got one that I've missed, let me know, please. But so far, nobody has. And the idea here is, it's kind of intuitive, stuff changes in life. Technology changes, competitors changed, enemies changed, environments change, ideas change, changes all around us. And I think we would argue now that the change is accelerating to the point of almost our capacity to stay with it. But it's always been that way. There's always been change and evolution. So if that is so logical to do, why would it be so hard? Here's the paradox. On the one hand, you have the necessity to change, if you believe what I just suggested. But on the other hand, you have human beings. And are human beings naturally gravitating to change? Quite the contrary. Humans are naturally biased to the status quo. They want the safety and security of knowing that however good or bad it is, tomorrow is pretty much like today. And the reason for that is because if it's going to be different tomorrow, that induces risk, and risk makes people worried, somewhere between anxious to scared. And so as a result of that, human beings will naturally gravitate to status quo. I don't like change, but that they have to change organizationally. And so that's the conflict, is to get people to change, you have to do something to make them move where they are right now. And in my view, that is the ultimate role of leadership. That leadership is really the only catalyst that ultimately is going to break that paradox where you move those resistant people to that area of change that you ultimately have to get to. Again, if you want to read a great book that illustrates this, it's Dr. Spencer Johnson's Who Moved My Cheese. It's a little parable. It's less than 100 pages. It's a great read, but it is profound, in my view, in its illustration of that resistance to change, but that the necessity of change is what we ultimately as humans have to do. So if I were to summarize sort of my views and my experience, that my ability to lead change and to model some of those traits that we talked about earlier, that people were willing to follow was, in my view, the secret of my success or my ability to transition into those jobs that I was underprepared for, underqualified for, but ultimately was able to achieve some level of success because of my somehow ability to move people through all these changing environments that I've experienced in my career. So with that, let me move to the lessons learned that I advertised that I would. And I talked about there's the good, the bad, and the other. So let me take each category in turn and sort of summarize some of these lessons learned. First, the good. The good news is, even though if you feel like you're not a born leader, there's plenty of education and experience available that will make you a better leader. What you're doing today, I guarantee, is going to help you be a better leader. Every time you volunteer to do something and take on a role and responsibility and an accountability, that's an experience that helps move you toward being a better leader. And all that is eminently available if you just look for it. And you don't have to look far, actually. Second point, don't overplan your career. Sometimes we plan a career, it's going to be just like this, and probably all that does is set you up for disappointment. Because if you're so set in the fact that that's going to be your career path, and the likelihood it's going to go just like you think it is actually pretty small. Yet I'm a believer that life is going to take you where it wants you to go. So goals are good, set yourself goals, but be flexible and open to opportunities as they occur, even if on its face it looks like not a very good opportunity. Because if you really think about it and you give it a go, and if you're willing to do what maybe other people aren't willing to do, it actually could be an accelerator and turn out better for you than otherwise it would have. At every turn, that's sort of what my life was like. Now, did I turn down a few? Yeah, I did. And so you got to make no decisions too. But those decisions are critical, and don't, just because it isn't according to your plan, doesn't mean that it's not a good opportunity. Third thing is that managing change, in my view, is the essence of leadership. I've already talked about that before. Leaders don't manage process. Now, you're responsible for process. Your performance will be judged by the process that you oversee. I mean, you got to get the trains running on time. But the real essence of and the differentiation of leadership is going to be how you manage change within that process, how you improve the process, what you do when the process is broken. Those are the reasons we need leaders, and those are where your skills should lie. I think everyone should strive for that idea of servant leadership with service above self. And there are characteristics around that. I mean, okay, what does that mean? I think some of the characteristics I would define is you're selfless, you're trustworthy. Self-confidence is part of being a servant leader. It doesn't mean that you're a shrinking violet. You have to be self-confident enough to be vulnerable, maybe, to act like a servant leader. You're empathetic, one of the hardest things for leaders to do, I think. You're caring. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you're human. You're going to make mistakes. Admit those mistakes. Move on. People expect you to make a mistake. What they don't expect for you to do is deny that mistake. So to me, those are characteristics of servant leadership that you might want to think about rallying around. And then finally, I would say the good part is what I found, at least in my career, is that leadership skills were the absolute differentiator in any success that I enjoyed in life. I remember a couple of hard conversations I had with my bosses, and they were about some leadership characteristics that I wasn't demonstrating very well that would have short-circuited my career. And it wasn't because I couldn't be an engineer, and it wasn't because I couldn't be a good marketer. It was because of some leadership skills. And the higher you go, the more important they are. And they really do become differentiators. I actually teach that to students at the University of Tennessee. I mean, they're going to get all the GPA and learning they want to, but when they go interview for that first job, they'll look at the GPA, put it right here, and they'll measure you as a person. Same thing when you go to interview for a job. They're looking for your characteristics, and ultimately, how high can you go? How much can you contribute to that organization? And I think the better your leadership skills are, the more likely that you'll be chosen to be successful. So that's the good. So what about the bad? All right, first of all, if you think leadership is about power and position and money, I think you're going to end up being disappointed, because those are extraordinarily fleeting things. Yeah, when you're in leader, it's great to be king. When I was CEO, it was great to be king because you were in a position of authority. You were in a position of power. You were in a notional position that people recognize. But that doesn't mean anybody's going to do what you say you're going to do. That doesn't mean you're going to be successful. That doesn't mean you're going to keep that job long if the characteristics and underpinning are that's all you care about. I'm just going to climb the ladder, and when I get there, declare it a success. That is extremely short-sighted and unfortunately in too much evidence in the country today. Second thing is, I would say there is no such thing as a perfect leader. I haven't met him yet, not even close to perfect. I will guarantee you that each one of us, and I will put myself in that ballpark, has development issues, things that you do less well. My question is, do you know what they are? Are you getting feedback? Are you self-aware enough? And what are you doing about it? You may not be able to fix them forever, but your self-awareness and knowing what is sort of making you less good is something that you really have to address. You know, I'll tell you what mine were. Again, this was a result of 360 feedbacks and hard conversations. There's two things I just don't do well. One, I'm a very bad listener. I'm a person of action. I'm ready to move out. I have the confidence of my thoughts and ideas. But sometimes you got to sit and listen to other people's ideas to understand what your flat points are. And I just was not a good listener. In fact, it had been reinforced in my career that that person of action, risk taker, move out kind of guy was what was getting me promoted. So why wouldn't you want to replicate that? It was only until I started getting the feedback that I was doing that at the expense of other people, their thoughts, their ideas, their feeling, their buy-in, that I realized was short-sighted. Second thing is, I'm a very impatient person. And impatience can be very bad if you just know that people can only move at a certain level in a certain direction. You can encourage them, but you can only flog the horse so much, right? So you have to understand the detrimental effect of my impatience. Now, today, I still am a bad listener and I'm still impatient, but I'm aware of it. I try not to let it be distractive. I'm sharing with other people and asking for feedback, and that liberates people to talk about me to my face as opposed to at the water cooler as to what a jerk I am. Third thing, there are certain leadership killers that will just destroy a leader faster than anything. Doubt, equivocation, corporate speak, you're not honest in the way you talk, indecision. Those are the things you really have to think about avoiding. There's probably some other ones on that list too, but these are ones that come most to mind to me. You just can't, even if you are in doubt, in the main, you can't exhibit that because people are looking for you ultimately to lead them and make a decision. And if they see a person in doubt or equivocating or doesn't know where they're going, that does not inspire confidence. That does not make them want to go where they otherwise would not go. Fourth on the bad is, unfortunately, there's no one size fits all. You would like to say that there is one approach or one direction that all leaders could take and it'll work. It's just not like that. Everything you do is going to end up being situational. All the environment that surrounds a decision you have to make or an issue that you're in or a tough problem you're trying to solve is going to be made up of a whole bunch of different variables and characteristics. And you've got to sort through that. You know what that's called? That's called judgment. Ultimate leaders have to exercise judgment. And so your critical thinking skills, your confidence, your experience will all form your judgment that you'll have to have someday to make a call. And guess what? Last thing is change is hard work and it's have many risks, and someday you're just going to be wrong. You just are, because again, nobody's perfect. So be prepared if you want to be a leader to do that hard work, those uncomfortable days, making those tough decisions, knowing that the information you have is going to be imperfect, and you're going to end up having to take some risk. Hopefully, it's a reasoned, prudent risk, but it'll be a risk nevertheless. So those are the sort of bad side of lessons learned. Now let me finish with my favorite three. These are the other. And these are just random things that I've talked about over the last probably 25 years. and keep resonating back to me because I think there's maybe a folksy truism in it. The first is that perception at the end of the day is reality. We all know that, right? So you think you're doing a great job. You've done everything you want to do right. But if people don't perceive you that way, it's not real. It's just not real. So your performance is going to be expected. You're going to try as hard as you can to do the right thing. But at the end of the day, you will be measured by how people perceive you to be doing it. And the hardest thing about leadership is to justify in your own mind that I did everything that I should have done right. But if the judgment of the body politic around you is, no, you didn't, you lose. So some people say, well, I disdain office politics. You're crazy. Office politics is in everything and in every organization. It's in the family unit. You have to be diplomatic and sensitive to perceptions. Know how people think about you, how you shape those perceptions, because they will ultimately affect people's view of you, and they will affect how far you go in an organization. Second one, I have a saying, and that is, everyone's your friend when you have free whiskey. True, right? Hey, party next door, free whiskey, I'm going. Let's go. Well, what that means is it's an interpersonal dynamic thing. You're working in an organization and somebody's got a tough job to do, and they come and ask you, can you help me out here? Now, you got choices to what you want to say. No, I'm not busy and my boss won't let me do it. I don't want to do it, whatever. The people I find that truly get ahead are the ones that are willing to throw themselves into the breach. Hey, I think I can help you with that. Hey, yeah, pick me. You got a bad job, boss wants it done. Why not you? Everyone likes people who want to help them out. That's what really that means. And so you want to end up being that person that people want to surround themselves that are going to help them out. I use this other analogy. Any of you have high maintenance friends? If you do, does anybody look forward to being around your high maintenance friends? I mean, they're friends, but it's hard. I'm gonna have to listen to that one more time. Well, don't be one of those people. Don't be high maintenance. Be optimistic, be helpful, be empathetic. Ask people how they're feeling for a while. Those are the kind of people that ultimately high performance people are attracted to or want to attract to themselves. And then my last other is what I call the Andy Warhol theory of career advancement. Now, you can go in any organization and be the best, whatever you are, best engineer, best program manager, best finance person, best sales and marketing person in the world. You're just killing it left and right. Your boss sees you, you're great. This is wonderful. This guy's a real high potential, high rising guy. And then one day, someone says, you know what? You're my kind of person. I want you to go up and brief the board of directors or the CEO or the executive council of the company on what we're doing in A, B, and C. Now, you're doing good work. Your performance reviews are great, but now you're going to be in the arena. Now you're going to get the ultimate visibility for the people that can really move your career. That's what I call what Andy Warhol used to say is everyone will be famous for 15 minutes. It's your 15 minutes of fame. You get to go to the board of directors, you get to brief them what you're doing, and you'll make an impression there that will, I won't say make or break your career, but advance or slow down your career based on how they think about you, because they'll remember you and your name and how well you did there. They'll say, well, what about that Nolan Rollins guy? Boy, he knocked it out of the park. Well, what are we doing for him? And I've seen it happen. Hell, I've done it. So the two things there is, one, do you recognize when you get your 15 minutes of fame? And two, do you take advantage of it? And that becomes an important accelerator of your career. For me, like the first 15 minutes I got is to brief the spouse program at the board of directors about 25 years ago. And so you want to do such a good job that all the spouses go back and talk to the board members saying, boy, that Clay Jones, wow, was that a good presentation? We like that. Those are the kind of 15 minutes of fame that you end up getting that would be very important to you. So I hope in all this, there were a few helpful hints. I think I've just got to my 45 minutes here, Nolan, and I will slow down here and see if anybody has any questions.
Feel free to unmute and ask the question as you have one. I have one to start here, Clay. I am